Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're so glad that you are here as we dig into the sermon from Sunday morning. All right, well, let's dive in.
Yeah, Kenneth. So, first off, the main point of your sermon was that those Jesus came from, he also came for.
Right.
One of the things that you started off with, you covered it quite a bit on Sunday, but why does Matthew begin with genealogy?
Yeah, so a genealogy is a good question. So it's not the most exciting part of the Bible. I'm sure many of you have skipped it or skimmed over it. But Matthew starts with a genealogy because it's very important to Matthew and his Jewish audience that he connects Jesus to the promises made to King David and Abraham. And so when God tells David, hey, there's going to be, I'm going to put someone on your throne forever and ever. Now, he's talking about the coming Messiah and things like that. And so this Jewish audience, that would have been very important to them. Remember, they were looking for a Messiah that would come like a conquering hero, conquer the nations, elevate Israel back to their importance and military might and all that. But Jesus came as a baby and in a very unexpected way. And so Matthew is helping his audience connect who Jesus is to the promises that were made. And he does it through the genealogy.
So he's kind of helping them ease into the idea of this being the Messiah.
Yeah.
Because it's not the way that they expected it to be. The genealogy helps them see how it's still true despite that.
Yeah, exactly. And so for us, it doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, we just read, like the King James Version, there's a lot of begatting going on, right? And
Yes.
so-and-so begat so-and-so, and so it doesn't mean a lot to us. But to them, it would have meant a whole lot more.
So in a sense, it's a very personal beginning to this book.
Yeah.
Okay. So why did you pick this part of Scripture to preach on? You could have preached on any part of the Christmas story. Why this particular part?
Well, I think Pastor Jim has this same philosophy. Sometimes we like to highlight parts of the Scripture that doesn't get a lot of attention, right? And so instead of preaching on the same thing all the time, we try and bounce around a little bit and hit those areas that, maybe someone hasn't read or maybe it's been overlooked. And so that's certainly the case in the Christmas story with the genealogy. So that's one reason. Another reason is there's just so much content there. There's so much meat. When you start looking into who is listed and why they're listed, it's almost shocking, right? I mean, we talked about this on Sunday, that if Matthew wanted people to like Jesus, why would you highlight so many bad apples, right? I mean, why would you highlight so many dark spots in the family tree of Jesus? And he does it for a reason, as you pointed out with the sticky point, that those he came from, he came for, right? He came for broken and messy and messed up people like us, the same people in his family tree as well. So that's why I chose it, to show, it doesn't get a lot of attention and it highlights very well who he came for.
Yeah, it's very good. It does a good job of highlighting the less reputable people at times in the genealogy of Christ. I mean, talking about that, there's a lot of messy spots and dark spots in Jesus' family tree.
Yep.
Why do we tend to hide the mess in our own lives?
For a number of reasons. I think the first reason would be pride, right? We want to appear better than we really are. I think in the church world, we've gotten quite good at hiding our messes or downplaying them and not being as honest and open with them as we could or should be, especially in a holiness tradition like ours, where, sin is a very big deal, but confessing that sin to another person isn't as big of a deal, right? I mean, we don't emphasize that maybe like we should. And so I think in a lot of people's minds, keeping that to yourself and trying to be as holy as you can be is almost a badge of spirituality, right? And if I don't have to confess to you that I was looking at pornography last night, or if I was greedy last week, or if I committed gluttony yesterday, that makes me look better in your eyes, right? If I have to confess it, that's a completely different story, right? All of a sudden, I'm opening myself up to you, and you may use that against me one day. You may judge me. You may reject me. You may, I don't know. So in some cases, sometimes it's easier just to hide that mess.
And so then, just as I'm thinking about this, is there something to be said for the fact that the black spots sort of are really brought up right there at the beginning of Jesus's genealogy there? Is there something to be said for us to take away from that possibly with, well, if Jesus's genealogy starts off with highlighting those negative areas, is there something to be said for our own life and how we should live, maybe leading off by being that honest and opening up about our secrets?
Absolutely. That's an excellent observation. I would say 100% yes. And if we follow Matthew throughout his gospel, Matthew would identify himself as one of those people, right? A tax collector, rejected by his own people, ripping off his own people. And he was an outsider for sure. And yet he is another example of someone who was accepted by Jesus, mess-ups and all, right? And so when it comes to the Christian faith, it's not healthy or helpful for you to puke up on everybody that you see, right? I mean,
right.
Hey, Angie, how are you doing? Oh, and you just...
Yeah, let alone if we just met,
Right,
Hi,
exactly.
welcome to our church. Blah.
That's off-putting, and that, but there should be, one or two, three people that you feel close enough to that you can share those deeper things with, right?
Okay.
So that you can be honest, that you can be open, that you can take off the mask and really show who you are. Otherwise, if you're always wearing a mask, then how can you be healed, right?
It's very true.
If you're always wearing a mask, then how can the brokenness be restored? I think Pastor Jim says this, that sin grows in the dark, but when you bring it into the light, it's exposed and can be dealt with.
Okay.
So,
well, not to get too pointed here with this next question, but we've talked about the black spots in Jesus' family tree. You talked about it quite a lot from up front there on Sunday. Is there a black spot or a secret from your own family tree that you can think of?
Nope.
Okay. Well, moving on.
Next question.
Next question.
No. Actually, I almost used this story on Sunday, but I couldn't. There was a lot of detail, so I was afraid it was going to get lost in communication. But I was chatting with my dad about this week. My dad grew up, and his mom had 3 sisters. So there were 4 sisters total.
Okay.
And one of them was Rosie. And my dad always referred to Aunt Rosie, and he grew up with her and knew her and all that. When his mother died 3 or 4 years ago, he found out that Rosie wasn't his aunt.
Oh.
Rosie was his cousin. So in other words, one of his mom's sister got impregnated by an American serviceman towards the end of World War II.
Okay.
And that was a big no-no. And so out of shame, the family decided to keep that a secret and tell the world that my dad's mom, my dad's grandmother, had another baby, which was Rosie. And so for his whole life, he was told a lie that Rosie was his aunt, when in fact Rosie was his cousin. Right?
Oh, wow.
And so, we were in America when we found out about this. There's a lot of weight to carry with shame like that. So obviously Rosie wasn't raised by her mother. Rosie was raised by her grandmother. And it was all the complications and ins and outs, and they had to hide the pregnancy. And so the real mother went away for a year. I don't know what they told everybody, but when she came back, she had a baby, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, the grandmother, that's my baby. And so, yeah, kind of dark.
Wow.
Kind of messy. And again, my dad didn't know about it until after his mom's death.
Oh, wow.
And so you're talking about a secret for...
Years and years.
I mean, Dad Dad's 60 now.
Mm-hmm.
So over 60 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that you talked about are three names that describe Jesus and their meanings. So Jesus, Christ, and Emmanuel.
Yep.
So why are those names important?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, again, Matthew is trying to show who Jesus is and for us, who Jesus was.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's pointing out in very careful language, Jesus is the guy that we have been waiting for as a Jewish people and as humanity. We've been waiting for this Messiah. Mm-hmm. Right? And so when you look at the names, Jesus, the one who saves, Christ, the anointed one, and Emmanuel, which is God with us. Good job.
Oh, you took me off guard and I blanked.
You did. That was good. And yeah, so God with us. He knew that, right? Yes. And so Matthew is showing his Jewish audience and ultimately us who will read the Gospel of Matthew thousands of years later who this Jesus was. And so it's important. You know, if you look at names in the Bible especially, lots of people have names with special meanings. Abraham, the father of many. No, that's not his name. What does Abraham mean? You remember?
You know, I didn't remember what Emmanuel meant. Yeah. Off the top of my head, I don't remember.
Abraham meant something. No. It's complete. If you remember the name of Abraham, put it in the comments, because I've just gone blank.
And then you'll be preaching next Sunday. Huh?
Yeah. And no, so like Abraham's name was changed.
Mm-hmm.
Peter's name was changed,
mm-hmm.
right? And so with the new name came a new identity,
mm-hmm.
right? And
you have
so
Saul to Paul, you have
yeah, exactly.
Jacob to Israel.
Yep. And so it's just another glimpse into who Jesus is and his identity and what he came to do on this earth. Mm-hmm. Matthew is connecting Jesus, this guy that was promised to Abraham and to David and through the prophets. This is the actual Messiah that we've been looking for, that we've been waiting for. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think it was important to bring that out.
So you're able to really flesh a lot of this stuff out through your sermons, and obviously you're doing a lot of the work behind the scenes beforehand that we may not see. But to somebody that's just reading Scripture on their own, a lot of this stuff, like the names, may just fly right over their heads, let alone the genealogy stuff we talked about at the beginning. What resources would you recommend to somebody that's trying to find out? Because that's a lot of really useful information. That's, like you said, there's a lot of meat on those bones that just an average person that's just reading through Scripture might miss out on. Yeah. What resources would you recommend they use to help them discover these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I would recommend, first of all, a good study Bible.
Okay.
Because a lot of good study Bibles, as you're reading names like that, they'll put a little number next to it, right? And you go to the bottom of the page and you find that number and it'll say, you know, here's what so-and-so's name means, mm-hmm. or here's what it means in Greek. So a good study Bible, sometimes concordances can help. And then, of course, the pastoral staff might be a good resource as well, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a question about, you know, what does this mean or what does that mean?
Not what names mean, because we just don't know.
We're just a youth pastor and a worship pastor here.
That's a gym question.
Yeah. No, so that's a good one. I think an excellent resource is called Blue Letter Bible. It's a free app.
Okay.
And you can type in a name and it'll tell you exactly what it means. You can type in a passage of Scripture and it will tell you, you know, how many times this word is used in the Bible and what it means in, you know, 3 different versions and stuff like that. So Blue Letter Bible mm-hmm. is an excellent resource. So that, a good study Bible, sometimes a concordance. So you can get lost in a concordance. Mm-hmm. We can be a resource, but yeah.
Okay. Very good. So overall, what do you hope people will do after hearing your message this Sunday?
I would hope, I would hope for a couple things.
Okay.
The first one is that, we would put Jesus in his rightful place in this season and obviously in our lives, mm-hmm. but that we would make Christmas about him. That we would maybe shy away from what the rest of the culture does and make it all about gifts and presents and us, and make it more about him. And so that's one thing. And then the second thing is what I probably hit on most in the message is this idea that we are, probably all of us are broken, right? At some level, all of us are broken. And we don't need to be ashamed of that brokenness. Jesus came to redeem it. Jesus came to heal it. And so where we find those brokenness in our lives, that brokenness, we can bring it to him. And we don't have to be ashamed, and we don't have to hide it, and we don't have to pretend everything is okay when it's not. We can go to him in honesty, like David did in the Bible, and just that raw emotion, and say, Lord, here I am for what it's worth. I know it's messy. What can you do? And God is often like, I can work with that, right? And so that's what I would hope, that you would bring those things to him and let him heal you. Because you don't have to carry that brokenness. And that's part of the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's kind of like this. You ever been in a room with a light switch with a fader on it?
Yeah.
And
we have one at our house.
Okay, yeah. So you can turn it all the way up, or you can turn it halfway up. And if you turn it halfway, it's not quite as bright as all the way, And if you turn it, just barely on, you can barely see anything if you don't have any windows. And so I think the Christian faith, when you come to Jesus, the light goes on. But I don't think it goes on all the way.
Okay.
Right? It just goes maybe at 10%. And at 10%, you look around the room, which is your life, and you may see a couple things. And you're like, oh, okay. That needs work. Like, it is obvious that God needs to work on that, and that's all you really see. And as God begins to heal those things, the light, and as you get to connect with Jesus a little bit more, he turns the light up a bit more. So maybe he goes to 25%. And all of a sudden, as the light goes up, you start to see other things that you never saw before. And like, oh, well, how I speak to my spouse needs to change. Oh, how I spend my money needs to change. Oh, what I do with my free time needs to change. Okay. And then God starts to heal those things and starts to work in those things. And then guess what he does? Turns the light up even more. And so maybe it goes to 40%. And at 40%, you're like, oh, there's something there. There's something, okay, God needs to work on my attitude. God needs to work on what I think about in my mind, what I fantasize about. And that's called, that's part of our sanctification process.
Yeah. That
God is continually working on us, continually helping us to look more and more like Jesus. And then he turns the light back up, to 60%, to 70%. And every time the light goes up a bit more, he's identifying more things in your life that needs to be redeemed, that Jesus needs to work on. And that's why you can have very dear saints in the church who have been Christians for our whole lives combined, right? Who will tell you God is still working on me. And you're like, how can that even be possible? You are the most God-like fearing person I've ever met, and you're telling me that God is still working on you? And they'll say yes. Right? Their light may be at 80%, but there's still room to go. Right? And so that's what I would hope, that we would, as the light goes up, that we would bring that brokenness, that sin, those attitudes, those things that essentially keep us from God, we'd lay them down before him and say, Lord, you do what you need to do. Yeah.
That's very good. Yeah, it's always scary when it's kind of that reverse effect. Like sometimes when we're young, we get scared of turning the lights out, but when you turn the lights on, it can be a scary thing too, especially when it relates to the way that you're talking about it. When we begin to look, cleaning out our closets, so to speak, it can be a very hard task, right? And I'm sure that you know as well as I do as pastors, we work in the process of leading people there, but it's always up to them to take that next step. There's an abundance of resources out there for them to use, whether you're tuning in to this or listening to the sermon on Sunday, or you're in your own Bible study, or you're reading scripture on your own. There's all constant reminders of that this is the process that we need to be going through on a daily basis. Right. But we have to take those steps and really put that into practice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And that's why you can read a verse in scripture and then read it again a month later, a year later, and it hits you in a completely different way, because essentially you're in a different place, right? Maybe you're closer to God, maybe you're further away from God. And the scripture, obviously, it's alive and all that, but it can hit you differently based on where you are.
Yeah, I can guarantee you the first time I read the genealogy, I was like, okay,
Yeah,
and
me
moving
too.
on.
Me too. In fact, when I first got saved, I think the first book I read, I didn't know anything about anything. I started with Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would have started with the genealogy. Nobody in my family saved. No, we never went to church. And so I don't remember this, but I'm sure I skipped Matthew chapter 1.
Yeah?
I'm sure of it.
Okay.
And now
Here you are teaching on it.
teaching. Funny how God works, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope that this was a blessing to you. If you have questions, if something that we said jogged a thought or something and you would like to discuss it or more of an explanation, please let us know. You can email either one of us. We'd love to help you with that if we can. And I hope that you guys have a fantastic day, and we'll see you next time. Bless you.
Bye, guys.